November. It's good to see so many folks in person. I know some people are going to be trickling in. And welcome, as always, to those on Zoom. It is my total honor this month to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Moupali as our November Leaders in Public Health speaker. As you know, we've been doing this series since my arrival as a way to feature folks who are truly creating transformational change in the field of public health across the full spectrum of work that we do. And Moupali is just an incredible example of all of the ways in which we, oh, am I not on? Oh, darn it. Well, okay. The Zoom people couldn't hear my welcome, so be it. Well, sorry about that. But it's a true honor to get to welcome her as an exemplar of one of the many ways in which we can create change, but has done so in some spaces that I think are quite unique and that we've not talked a lot about before. So as a brief intro, Dr. Das is Vice President of Clinical Development in HIV Prevention and Virology, Pediatrics at Gilead Sciences. In that role, she leads high-performing cross-functional teams accountable for the overall development strategy and the conception, design, and execution of HIV prevention clinical trials that we'll talk about from phase 1 through phase 4, ensures efficient development and regulatory approvals to support rapid access to innovative products to help end the HIV epidemic, and thinks about how the medications can be applied to the pediatric space. In terms of background, she's trained in ID and HIV as a physician with a background in both academic medicine and public health. Went to Harvard undergrad, then received her MD from Columbia, where we intersected, and her MPH from UC Berkeley. She's also, as I said, a longtime friend. Both of us were actually inspired in many ways to go into public health by a shared mentor, Jonathan Mann, who unfortunately passed in a plane crash when we were undergrads. But it's an absolute honor to have you here today, Moupali. I've admired your career from afar for many years, and I'm so thrilled to get to welcome you here to Yale. So
thank you so much. Oh, wait.
And maybe yours might not be turned on either. So sorry, guys.
Is it turned on?
Is it? Can you guys hear her? There we go.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you for that embarrassing and too kind introduction. Let me try to make this go into my.
All good.
All right.
So while you get that going, I'm actually going to ask you to share a story from this. We were just chatting. You said that this morning was awesome. And I think it exemplifies so much of what you do in public health.
So one of the things that I had been working on at Gilead since 2018 is the development of a long-acting injectable for HIV prevention. It's called lenacapavir, and it's a twice-yearly subcutaneous injection. We started the trials in 2020, 2021, because pandemic, et cetera. And we got the results on June 18th of 24 and approval with the FDA June 18th of 25, that's pretty unheard of, actually. And then subsequently, we got approval in the EU and in South Africa and Zambia yesterday. So the Zambia approval was 17 days, which is phenomenal. And we can talk about regulatory approval if anybody's interested in that. But all this to say is the whole time I've worked on all these trials, because of patient confidentiality and other things, I've never seen a live lenacapavir injection. We did it in training and in phase 1, but I've never seen an actual person who might benefit from PrEP receive one. And today I got to see 2 randomly. So this morning I woke up to a text on WhatsApp from a friend in North Carolina who's an advocate, and he was like, "I'm getting my injection today. Do you want to watch it?" And I was like, "Sure, if that's okay with your doctor." So he set up a Zoom link, and as I was walking over here this morning, I got to watch him get his injection while I was walking over here. And then the second most exciting thing was, and many thanks to you and your team for setting this up, I got to meet Dr. Springer and go out to her mobile health van, and randomly she had someone who came in and was interested in starting PrEP, and I got to watch her get her injection. So it was a phenomenal morning. And like the 7+ years I've been working on lenacapavir, I've never had the opportunity to actually experience person in real life getting their injection. So it was really exciting for me, and both injections went really well, and it was great. It was just a nice feeling to be, off the campus and in real life and seeing this happen. So it was a great morning.
Do you want to just provide a little background? How many people here are familiar with lenacapavir? About a third. And so do you want to give people a little background?
So,
and even the story of it, which I think is so cool.
All right.
Yeah.
So for people who might be familiar in infectious diseases, we have this thing called pre-exposure prophylaxis. So let's say I'm going somewhere that's endemic with malaria. I might get malaria pre-exposure prophylaxis. I'll start taking it before I go to the endemic area, make sure I'm protected, and take it maybe for a week afterwards. Each pill has a different regimen. And with HIV, we've had HIV treatment with the cocktail since 1996. And we've had HIV prevention since 2012. And so the first product is Truvada, which is 2 pills together. It's FTC plus TDF. Anyway, it's 2 different NRTIs which help inhibit HIV, and they work for treatment and prevention. So that's together in 1 pill. And then I helped develop Descovy, which is an improved version of the tenofovir component of Truvada, and that's another daily pill. So both of these drugs are daily pills. In the prevention space, sometimes it's hard to remember to take a daily pill if you don't have a disease, right? Like you're taking it to prevent. There's also the stigma associated, and which can affect people's adherence over time, because it's kind of stressful every day. You have a reminder of the fact that you're trying to prevent a disease that is associated with stigma. So there are people who have challenges with daily adherence. So, and I think it's very analogous to pregnancy prevention. Yeah. So we had daily oral pregnancy prevention in the 70s, but we didn't really deeply address teenage pregnancy prevention in the United States until we had long-acting hormonal contraceptives. And so this is analogous. So we developed a twice-yearly subcutaneous injection, lenacapavir, which helps reduce the requirement of a daily pill taking, and it had 100% efficacy in cisgender women, which is unheard of, and very high efficacy, 96% efficacy in cisgender gay men and other gender diverse people. And these pivotal trials read out last year, and now we have approval. And I think it's very important from a public health perspective. If you want to control any epidemic, you need to find out in your community who has the disease. And if people have the disease, they need adequate treatment and cure if that's possible. That's not the case in HIV yet at a population level. And in HIV, we want to make sure that people are on effective treatment and virally suppressed for their own individual benefit. And if they're virally suppressed, U equals U, undetectable means untransmissible, they can't pass it on. And then if they don't have HIV yet, we want to make sure that people who might benefit from PrEP have the opportunity to be on prevention. So that helps us tackle both sides of both the sort of reservoir of existing infection and how to address that individually and for public health benefit and for prevention.
And it is amazing. I mean, lenacapavir, so I'm just going to say it got the Science Breakthrough of the Year designation from Science Magazine and from AAAS this year. It was like a 13-year journey
since 2006.
To get to this point, and it is the closest thing that we have to an HIV vaccine, and is really transforming the way that we think about HIV prevention. And honestly, well, please. So I am going to come back to the trials, because I actually think for those of us in the room that are very interested in clinical trials and trial design, they're super, super cool and interesting. But I'm going to go back before I get to that point. I've known you for a long time. I know a bit about your journey and how you got into this, but you don't often I think a lot of us in public health think about pharma as being this kind of big bad thing. It's not. But that at the same time, people are really attracted into the field of public health because of the things that brought you into it. So I wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your career journey and,
Sure.
and how you ended up at Gilead as part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the 80s, and HIV was the pandemic of our time. I was around the same age as Ryan White. Some of you may remember who he was. He and his brothers acquired HIV because they had blood transfusions or treatments with blood products because they all had hemophilia. And I remember hearing about him not being able to go to school because people were worried, because back then people didn't understand HIV transmission. And as a big nerd, it's really disturbing to me that somebody was not allowed to go to school, because I felt really bad for them. But so I remember Ryan White's story. And then when we went to college, I had two very important influences I'll talk about in a second. But I would say, as like my grandfather was a physician, my other grandfather was an engineer, and my great grandfather was an attorney. And these were like kind of the options as a Bengali person in the United States. It's like either medicine or some kind of science. But I was really interested in the field of HIV because I love the immunology and biochemistry, and that was my major as an undergrad. But I also like the health and human rights and social justice angle. And I could see myself have going into law and going into international health and human rights law. And the thing that I love the most about HIV is that you get to do amazing, cool science. You get to work with amazing people and advocates and fascinating humans doing good things and trying to make the world a better place. And you get to influence policy and really hopefully help end an epidemic. So that was part of it. But I guess I thought I was going to do an MD PhD and do a PhD in basic science, because I thought if I was going to do science, I had to do something in the lab. But turns out that lab was not for me.
Mm-hmm. Me neither.
And then I took this class that Megan and I took probably a year apart, called Health and Human Rights by Jonathan Mann. And my favorite quote from Dr. Mann is that a male-dominated society is a danger to the public's health. Not women's health, but the public's health. And it was this eye-opening quote that like changed the way I thought about things, and it also changed the way I thought about how to make progress in the world. And my other influence was Paul Farmer, who developed this amazing approach to infectious diseases and showing that we could take care of people with HIV in very resource-limited settings. And I had the honor of working with him on this book, Infections and Inequality, and spending time with him and his teams in Haiti. And in Infections and Inequality, my favorite quote of his from there is that infections track along the fault lines of social inequality. And in my work over the last 12 years, my corollary, if you will, to that is if we're not intentional with innovation, we can exacerbate unintentionally these inequalities and these disparities. So I think that my work and experiences in all the different places I've worked and learned and studied have really helped us implement the lenacapavir clinical trials and all the work that we've done in a way that is very intentional, that's designed to help those people most disproportionately affected by a disease and try to ameliorate these inequalities rather than exacerbate them. And what Megan's alluding to is that I had a classic kind of career path of academic medicine. I pivoted to public health and semi-academic, it was quite academic because it was all grant funded, public health. And then I came to Gilead in 2013. And I would say, I wish I had joined earlier. I was having a great time working in San Francisco at the Department of Public Health, but the reason I wish I had joined earlier is our company has a tremendous amount of resources, and the resources allowed us to implement the trials the way I would have loved to have done in an academic medicine or public health setting, but with the resources and ability to really affect change and with the infrastructure and the teams to really implement things and change the way we were doing trials. Like, we set up a trial in the Eastern Cape, and it was a like shipping container. And the Eastern Cape did not have a clinical research site. We set one up there, and I heard later one of the physicians who started heading up that site told me that I had changed the trajectory of her family, because they got this trial and then they got multiple other trials, and her sister is a physician and they were working there together.
That's awesome.
I still get really emotional hearing about that. We also set up a clinic and created an engagement with an experienced PI and a community organization on the border in El Paso, with people who specifically had expertise for people who are not Spanish speakers, but indigenous language speakers who are coming through at that time, and we enrolled several of them in Purpose 2. So there's a lot of things that we were able to do that got us to the people that we're trying to affect, who are disproportionately affected by HIV, and I don't think I would have been able to do that except for at Gilead.
I love that, and I think for the students in the room, I think it's a really important message, right? We spend a lot of time talking about what your career path will be, and I feel like there's often this like dirty word, right, of, oh, I'm gonna go work in the private sector, and to me, Moupali is one of the exemplars of why the private sector is a great thing in many ways, and what Gilead is doing now with making lenacapavir available is just pretty, and I know is in part thanks to you, is pretty extraordinary. Which you can talk about, but I also want to talk about purpose and your design.
Okay.
Because I've got some epidemiologists and biostatisticians in the room who I are going to be very interested in how you thought differently and have changed the paradigm for how we do clinical trials.
Okay. Well, I will say it's not just me. It's a team of like 18,000 people.
Sure.
Right. And lots of really committed people who really want to help end the HIV epidemic. Okay, let's take a hard pivot into biostatistics.
Yay.
Okay, so one of the challenges with developing HIV prevention drugs in cisgender women is the first 3 trials that were done in cisgender women did not work. So these were Truvada trials, FemPrep, Voice, and there were 3 trials done, FemPrep, Voice, and Partners Prep. 2 of them showed absolutely no efficacy of Truvada for HIV prevention in cisgender women. Partners Prep worked, and Partners Prep was a very unique design where the women or men were negative, and they were enrolled with their positive partner who was not on treatment. So the negative people in this study had an increased incentive to utilize PrEP because they knew for sure that their partner was positive and not on HIV treatment. This happened in an era where that was ethical because there used to be CD4 guidelines about when to initiate treatment. So these people at that time period were healthy enough to not require treatment, but that paradigm has changed because we have much better and more efficacious HIV therapies, and we think it's better to treat anyone who has an infectious disease with the treatment for it. Anyway, so 2 of the trials worked, didn't work, and 1 did, and that means you can't calculate a non-inferiority margin. So when you have an approved drug, the next generation of trials have to either be superiority trials or non-inferiority trials comparing to standard of care, which is that approved medicine. So in the space for HIV prevention in women, we would have to compare to Truvada. Now, we know that Truvada works for PrEP in HIV prevention because it was efficacious in Partners Prep, because more women adhered to it. And it's been efficacious since 2012 in the women who've been using it for prevention. So it's highly efficacious, close to 99% if people take it as directed, which is daily. So we're in this weird space where we know this drug works and should be the standard of care comparator, but purists, at statistical agencies and regulatory agencies within the scholarly field feel like you can't just use the efficacy estimate from one of the 3 trials because then you're cherry picking the trials. So as a result, we couldn't do a non-inferiority comparison, and the regulatory agencies wanted us to compare lenacapavir to nothing, which
It's kind of unethical.
Super unethical. And I was like, I'm not doing that. So we came up.
Leadership.
Well, just not me. Like everybody was like, this is a bad idea. So we came up with this way to estimate what the background HIV incidence was or would have been, the counterfactual HIV incidence in a population, and then look at the incidence while on lenacapavir or any other drug. And this comes again from the world of contraception, the world of the Pearl Index. Pearl Index is another place where you can't really randomize somebody. If you're developing new contraceptives, not many women would agree to be randomized to placebo or a contraceptive. So we know what the rate of pregnancy is in women not on contraception, which is, let's say, 80 per 100 person years. So if we follow 100 women who are sexually active and reproductively capable, you would see 80 pregnancies. Now, if you take those 100 women over a year and put them on a contraceptive and you see 1 to 2 pregnancies, you don't need a statistician to tell you that that drug is working as a contraceptive. So we took that Pearl Index analogy, and this was work pioneered by Jeff Murray at the FDA, formerly at the FDA, who came up with the idea of applying the Pearl Index to HIV. So if we knew what the background incidence was in a population, we could put people only on drugs. So on lenacapavir, on Descovy, on Truvada, look at their incidence over a year on that product and then compare it to this estimation of what the background incidence would have been if they weren't on PrEP. And then we use some fancy techniques to figure out the background incidence. You could use old studies, you could use surveillance data if you were in a location where you had surveillance data, or you could use the procedure we used, which was using a special test called the recency assay, which was able to evaluate how recently if somebody was recently infected with HIV and then back calculate that to a yearly annualized incidence rate, because it's kind of like a detuned assay. And we could talk about that in more detail if people are interested. But that was the innovation in the study design. Then we have the innovation in the product. And then we also had innovations in other aspects of the design, which I call the 4 pillars of purpose, health, equity, which was partnerships, the voice of the people and community, person-centric design, and the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and including those populations who are disproportionately affected by HIV globally.
So one of the things, I thank you. I love that. Kudos. And to anyone in the room who is questioning how some of our basic methodology can change the impact of the world, I think this is a great example. When you think about the design of those trials, one of the things, and you've mentioned it in those 4 pillars that you did, was to make sure that the folks who were going to end up most needing to take lenacapavir were part of the trial design from the get-go. This is a huge emphasis for me. This is a big emphasis for our school of thinking how science and society link, thinking about how the people who are going to use the science can be part of its creation. Can you share a little bit about those partnerships, particularly in Southern Africa, and kind of how you thought about making sure that the most at-risk populations had a voice in trial design?
So I would say, like, guiding principle was ACT UP principle of nothing about us without us. So
Greg is not in the room right now, but we all are thankful for him. Yep.
In December of 2019, we went to Rwanda and we met with an amazing group of people, mostly women, investigators, site staff, public health officials, community advocates, civil society, ethics, and regulators. And we brought them all together to say, we're about to start a series of prevention trials. We want your advice and input. And in particular, I wanted to know about 2 innovative aspects that I wanted to introduce into the trials. One was the inclusion of pregnant and lactating people, and the other was the inclusion of adolescents, of 16 and 17-year-olds. Both these groups are disproportionately affected by HIV, but it's very hard to do drug trials with pregnant women. And these decisions were being considered during the pandemic, and we all know how hard it was for
the COVID pandemic.
The COVID pandemic, right, sorry. The COVID pandemic, and we all know how hard it was for our friends who are pregnant to figure out, like, should they be on the vaccine or not, because they had not studied pregnant people in the initial vaccine trials. And that's because we're afraid to cause harm. But there has been a real focus in the field of changing the justification for inclusion to the justification for exclusion. So it's
like opt-in versus opt-out. Yeah.
It's better to protect people through research rather than from research. And so we had all of our preclinical data in multiple species, plus we had a host of understanding of how Descovy and Truvada worked in pregnancy, in treatment, in HIV and Hep B, because those drugs also work for hepatitis B. And we felt very comfortable about taking this approach, but we had this group together and we got their advice. There was robust discussion, lots of strong opinions. And then towards the end of the meeting, a 17-year-old girl stood up and we saw that she was quite pregnant. And she said, "You have to include people like me and my friends because I don't want to get HIV. I don't want my baby to get HIV." And she was taking oral PrEP and she wanted an opportunity to have new options to protect herself and her baby. And her story is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And it helped me change hearts and minds internally at ethics committees, at regulatory agencies, because this is literally the voice of the person who would benefit from PrEP. And you can show people tons and tons of data and lots of policy pieces and articles about all those principles of like justifying exclusion rather than inclusion. It doesn't really mean something until you tell people the story of a person. And so having those stories and hearing directly from the people that we're making the products for is a tremendously important aspect. And so that kicked off our community engagement process. We had a series of other consultations with the countries that we were going to work in, and then we set up a community advisory and accountability group that met every other month with us. We told them the progress of the trials. They reviewed informed consent forms. They reviewed study documents. They reviewed all kinds of stuff and provided a lot of input. They told us to do a bunch of things like drug-drug interaction studies with hormonal contraceptives, studying PK, lenacapavir concentrations in blood during pregnancy, in babies, and breast milk, all of this stuff that we did implement, and they truly made the science better because we think the science is better when everyone has a seat at the table.
Which is extraordinary. I mean, really, Moupali, like the biostats is cool, but like that is just extraordinary. And now that lenacapavir is out, folks are using it, right?
Exactly. And I think normally there's an 8 to 10 year delay before there's any information about pregnancy or pediatric populations for antiretrovirals. And our first labels all have that information.
Awesome.
So that's like 10 years of infections averted.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. Especially in this time where we know that many of the levers that we've leaned on to help prevent HIV transmission have disappeared. To be able to give someone a twice-a-year shot starting today is pretty incredible, at cost, basically.
Right. So we have partnered with the Gates Foundation, Unitaid, the CDC, and the State Department, including people who previously worked at USAID and PEPFAR, to create an incredibly bold approach to making sure lenacapavir gets to people who need it the most. The first thing was a truly global registrational strategy. So after you get the results from the trials, you do filings in countries. And yesterday I mentioned that doing a filing is like doing 5 R01s. And it's actually more complicated than that because it's not just the data from the studies, it's also all the manufacturing stuff and drug stability and a whole bunch of stuff. But there's people who do that who are brilliant at Gilead, and I'm delighted to have them on our team. But anyway, we filed, usually most companies will file in the countries where they're going to get reimbursement, right? And that makes sense because you have to make the money back so you can continue to invest in new innovation. And what we did differently was file in the US, the EU at the same time, and we also filed in this pathway called EU Medicines for All. And EU Medicines for All allows countries with fewer resources and less resource regulatory agencies to be able to use the EU or European approval and the hard work that the European medicines agencies did to get the drug approved through a collaboration with WHO. It's called the Collaborative Registrational Procedure. And once you get the positive opinion from the EU that they think this drug is going to be approved, we use that approval and the European label, and that's how we got the Zambia approval in 17 days.
Awesome.
So this is the first time a PrEP drug has gone through that process. It's been used for other emergencies in the past, including aspects of that for remdesivir for COVID, but this was our first, foray into this. So but access is not just regulatory approval. You also have to make sure that the countries are going to reimburse it, or donor agencies and collaborators are going to provide product. So what we did was make agreements with 5 generic companies, and we transferred our IP before we filed with the FDA. So we made the generic agreements, we gave them our intellectual property, they got ready to make lenacapavir before we had regulatory filings even anywhere towards the end of 2024. In addition to that, because it takes generics like 2 to 3 years to get up and running, we're providing drug at a non-profit price for 2 million people to get lenacapavir for 3 years in sub-Saharan Africa. So while the generics are getting up and running and getting their supply chain going, we're just giving len through that process. And we're continuing to work with other regional health organizations like the Pan American Health Organization to cover Latin America, and working with WHO and other multilateral agencies for Asia.
These are things we could have only dreamed of in the mid-90s. I mean, it's
it's crazy.
It's awesome. Okay, I have like another 12 questions, but I'm going to do 2 more, and then I will open stuff up for discussion. So start thinking now about kind of what your questions are. So I'm going to tell you what the 2 questions are, so that then you can. So one is, you've talked a lot about the team, and I have a lot of folks in this room who love to be part of teams, either staying within academia or because they're going to be out looking for jobs. And so would love to hear kind of what makes a good team member, what you guys look for, because it is, right, no single person is going to be able to do the whole thing. So that's my first question.
Okay.
But my second one is like, what gives you the courage to be this kind of leader?
Oh my God.
Because, no, but seriously, like you talk about Paul Farmer and Jonathan Mann, who you and I grew up looking up to, but I would say that in some ways you are now.
Oh my, no, please stop.
But you're on your way. And like, so I'm curious about kind of what gives you courage. So those are my 2 questions. Take them in whichever order you'd like.
Yeah, okay, I'm saving the courage one while the back of my brain works on that. Okay, so what makes a good team member? Okay, so the first thing to say is, there are roles in industry that probably people don't have any idea about. Like I didn't have any idea about. Like when I was a sub-I on a grant, right? I wrote the ethics package myself and submitted it to the UCSF CHR. I did, and poorly, because I didn't know how to do it. It's like see one, do one, teach one. In this case, I didn't even see one, I was doing one. And so to back up a second, there are big different divisions in a pharmaceutical company. So I will talk about Gilead because it's the only place I've ever worked that's a pharma. So you have development. They're the people that make the drugs and get them approved. So first in human to phase 4. Then you have medical affairs and commercial as the 3 big arms of a company, and PDM, which is like pharmaceutical manufacturing, the people who actually make the product and make the stuff. Okay, so within development there is, and then there's research, the people in the lab who were like figuring out which side chains to add to lenacapavir for 5 to 7 years before we got to lenacapavir. So once it comes into humans, we do the first in human study in clinical development, but we have people who work in our regulatory group, we have people who work in our operations group. So operations is like your study coordinators and that kind of group of people, but they are working with a contract research organization to study 10,000 patients globally in 7 continents, right? So you're not seeing the patients yourself or working, like we don't see patients at Gilead. We work with all the, brilliant expert academic investigators who see the patients at their sites and community investigators. So anyway, we have clinical operations, we have regulatory, they're the people who are engaging with our agencies, and there is a field of science called regulatory science. I didn't even know that was a thing. But all of these things that we're talking about with like EU Med for All or different approaches, like what does FDA need? What does EMA need? What does South Africa want? Why is Argentina is so specific about pregnancy? Like these are all these things that they have expertise in, and they also work with local country affiliates in all of those countries. Then you have clinical pharmacology. We'd be nowhere without them. So you can get a degree in clinical pharmacology. You could work at CVS as a pharmacist, or you could work on one of the study sites here, but you can also work in drug development. And then there's divisions within them that I didn't even know about, like pharmacometricians and pharmacometrics, which is a new discipline, I think, over the last 10 to 15 years, where they have been developing mathematical modeling so you can do less stuff in animals and humans and figure out more things in using mathematical models that are helpful for dose selection and trying to figure out the safest dose and the most effective dose. So you have clinical pharmacology. Then you have patient safety and pharmacovigilance. For people in the HIV space, that over the past decade, there was a signal with dolutegravir in pregnancy and neural tube defects. One of the challenges was the rate of neural tube defects on that medicine, dolutegravir, in Botswana was being compared to US populations where we supplement folate in anything. Like, unless you're super low carb to zero carb, you're getting folate because it's in Wheaties, it's in bread, it's in everything, right? But they don't do that in other
Folate deficiency causes neural tube defects.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry. Anyway, so our pharmacovigilance and patient safety people are brilliant epidemiologists because they do this disproportionality analysis where they compare an unexpected adverse event that's happening in the trial or in the population with the background expected rate. So again, it's like another counterfactual analysis, but if you look, and you have to be comparing apples to apples. So if you're looking at rates of miscarriages or neural tube defects in sub-Saharan Africa, you have to look at data from there. And so you're comparing similar populations with similar incidence and prevalence of the AE of interest. So that's kind of, and then there's, those are the main team members in development. And then after approval, we have people whose job is to make sure that folks who don't go to fancy HIV conferences know all about our medications and how to use them, and work really deeply in implementation science, like my 2 colleagues here in medical affairs, who make sure that people have all the tools and resources they need to implement lenacapavir. And then we have our commercial teams who are helping with field reimbursement, making sure people know like about pharmacy benefits and medical benefits, and like, is Connecticut Medicaid covering Len? Yes, it is. And so is Medi-Cal in California, et cetera. So there's just like a million people in the journey from this idea to a molecule in a lab, to first in human studies, to giant pivotal programs, to approval, to implemenation and access.
And if they want, what do you look for?
What do I look for? I guess I would describe it, again, as a nerd, as good protoplasm. I want someone who is smart and kind and does not have a big ego and is not an a-hole. I have a very strict no a-holes rule.
It's a good one.
I want somebody who cares and is empathetic and is interested and not just a robot, although sometimes robots are good. That is what I look for. I've had the honor of being able to hire 6 ID people to my small team of prep clinical ID people, 6 people. And that's what I looked at when I interviewed people.
Thank you. All right, so now we'll do the courage question quickly, so we have time. So I'll give you a pass a little bit,
Okay.
just briefly, and then I'll open stuff up to the audience. Because you are courageous.
I think it's about trying not to care about what other people think, despite being raised in a culture where caring about what society thinks is a huge part of our upbringing. So defying that aspect and trying to do the right thing and caring about all kinds of people and trying to understand what motivates a person and where they're coming from. I'll give you a specific example in 5 seconds. Okay, in 30 seconds. So we did the study in South Africa and Uganda, and a lot of our patients in Uganda came from these remote islands called Kalangala on Lake Victoria, and they took these tiny little wooden canoes with a motorboat motor to get from Kalangala to the mainland to come to the research site. Our visits take forever. And I wanted the girls to be able to spend overnight in a hotel on the mainland so they could go back in the morning, because you can't run boats overnight because there are too many accidents, there's no lights, and it's dangerous. So
sounds like some good reasons.
Right. But then one of the things that governs our work is very strict ethics and anti-bribery rules and concerns about undue inducement of participants. So when they heard that I wanted to put somebody up in a hotel overnight, they were like, why can't they being our our legal team, and regulatory ad promo teams, they were like, why can't they Uber home? So I have a slide.
Canoe.
I have a slide that shows the delivery ward and the canoe, and I have video of people macheting through some jungle to make that site a site. And I sent those videos to the legal people, and I was like, this is why they cannot take an Uber home. And I do not want to be responsible for any gender-based violence of this person. They need to stay in a safe hotel overnight. So it's finding out where that person's coming from, kindly educating people and opening their mind, because this person had never left Scotland and did not understand the context. They thought the participant could Uber home and was like any of our participants in San Francisco or New York City. So I think it's just trying to figure out how to change hearts and minds with good data and better stories.
Oh, I love that. That is, I'm going to take that line and use that over and over. Thank you, Moupali. Really appreciate it. I will open stuff up to all of you. Again, I could go on for another hour, but in the middle and then back. And if you guys don't mind introducing yourself, your name, and kind of what your role is here at the school, so Dr. Das has a sense of who you are.
Sure. I'm Taylor. I'm a second-year MPH student. I actually worked on purpose too.
Oh, cool.
And I'm doing my thesis on lenacapavir. So I have
that's so exciting.
Gazillion questions, but I'll just stick to one. So through my time working on purpose too, I saw the injection itself, to give it and receive it is quite difficult. It's a huge injection. It's very viscous. It's uncomfortable both for the patient and the nurse. So how do you see this being an implementation issue in especially like low resource settings, and how does Gilead plan to navigate that?
Okay, so
fun question.
It is a large volume viscous injection. The reason it's viscous is it's kind of insoluble, and we need that so it lives under your skin in your sub-Q space for 6 months. I just saw 2 injections this morning, and I will have Dr. Springer share her experience as well. If you pre-ice and use the proper technique of going in between 45 and 90 degree angle and find the place on the person's body with the most sub-Q fat, even people with totally flat abdomens might have some sub-Q fat in the love handle space. And if you've had twins like me, there's lots of space, so I'd be a great candidate in my belly, but you can also give it in the thigh in the United States. We are studying alternative injection sites, and also letting people choose where they get it on their body is, I think, very empowering. So what is Gilead doing? We've hired an army of nurse educators, so they are out in the field teaching people how to do the best injection technique. The second thing that we're doing is making sure our medical scientists have all of the information and are empowering people. We're giving people ice packs to help make sure that people are getting appropriately ice, and we're training people and talking them through it. We're doing other kinds of pain medication measures. My kid just had an IV because he needed to get an MRI. And they had this thing that called Buzzy.
The Buzzy Bee.
The Buzzy Bee, which is an ice pack that vibrates that you can put on the person's body, and it cools them down, and then the vibration confuses the proprioception, so you don't really feel the pain as much. I haven't seen anybody use it in the adult setting, but they use it for vaccines and IVs in little kids. So these are all on our website, and we have excellent resources, and anyone who's interested, Jennifer can email you a list of the resources and connections to the nurse educators and all of the resources we have online. And actually, the experience of the injectable in the lowest income settings was much better than in higher income settings, because as a gentleman said yesterday, not me, men complain more about pain, especially in the United States. But anyway, it can be a reasonable experience that is not painful if people follow all the procedures. Dr. Springer, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, absolutely agree.
She's got the mic.
Oh. All right.
Okay.
We don't want to
Well,
Okay.
we do. We love hearing from you, but
it's exactly that. And so
Yeah. And like, talk to the person while you're giving them the injection, kind of distract them, tell them to blow out as you're going in, just like nursing stuff that makes a pleasant injection.
and implementation science, right? And I
Yeah.
know that we have some folks in the room, right? It's kind of one of those spaces where I think one of the joys of a school of public health is that we have all of these different disciplines. So you may be, and I don't know what your concentration or department is, but right, maybe you're in chronic disease epi or in the global health concentration, but you can work with some of our folks that are doing implementation science or who are thinking more about kind of clinical trials, right? And so being able to combine those different perspectives is what then makes something successful, and it's part of what's possible at Gilead in a way that here we do one R01, and then we have to go and wait for the next one. And I think it's one of the things that's really neat about what's possible for them. I want to get to our second question, yes. And then maybe if there's some online, we can do one online as well.
Hi, my name's Emilio. I'm a first-year master's student for chronic disease epidemiology, and it's great to hear about implementation science. I'm going to intro to implementation science in 10 minutes.
Okay, cool.
So very relevant. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in South Africa working on HIV mitigation education activities up until last year in July. And my question is about distribution of lenacapavir in South Africa. From what I understand, PEPFAR and USAID were supporting a lot of the funding for South Africa to distribute ARVs for free to its population. That was happening when I was there. But I know as of this year, PEPFAR funding is largely decreased or pulled entirely out of South Africa. Like Peace Corps volunteers there right now don't have any PEPFAR funding for their activities. So my question is, like, what will distribution of this injectable look like in South Africa from a cost perspective? I know you talked about it will be at a nonprofit price, but in lots of communities, that's still an unattainable price.
It is basically priced similarly to oral PrEP right now. It's the same price. And if you just Google lenacapavir in South Africa and Public Health Department, you will get their plan. And they plan to give their first injections early next year. It just got approved in October. And we have been working collaboratively with the health department in South Africa to figure out where our clinical trial sites were, so they would have that expertise. And they are putting Len in the public health locations. It's also a myth that PEPFAR is gone, because it's not. Mm-hmm. It's just reconfigured. PEPFAR still exists at the CDC. If you Google lenacapavir State Department, there's a September press release that talks about their plan. So we are collaborating with them. They agreed to buy the doses for 2 million people over 3 years. So that's still happening. Gates, amazing. Unitaid, we're working with different partners. They're replenishing the Global Fund, which the US used to contribute a ton of money to, but other people have stepped up, like the Nordic countries, the UK, and South Africa. And the United States government, instead of working through NGOs and nonprofits and other folks, they're focused now, the administration is focused on working directly government to government in an effort to try to reduce what their perception is of challenges of working through the NGO system. So it's chaotic. It's different than what we were expecting, but we are continuing to partner with anyone who wants to partner with us. We talk to everybody who wants to talk to us, from advocates to governments to multilateral organizations, to get Len to the people who most need it. And South Africa was our first priority, and they're already approved in the same year as the US, which has never happened before. So.
And I'll say Dr. Katz will be joining us in January as the new director of the Institute for Global Health. She was a deputy director at PEPFAR and will be faculty with us starting January 1st. So hold that question for her as well.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do one question online, and then I saw Dr. Adrian. So we'll do time for 2 more questions.
This question's from a student. It said, you mentioned some barriers to care globally for people accessing lenacapavir, like the boat journey and the hotel stay. What other barriers to care have you seen in trying to increase global access to this intervention?
Right, so that was in the context of the clinical trial, just FYI, the boat journey, et cetera. But I think barriers to PrEP uptake, there's barriers to PrEP uptake, PrEP adherence if it's daily PrEP, and PrEP persistence, coming back and getting your refills and staying on PrEP for a long time. There are advantages of a twice-yearly drug that can affect adherence and persistence. The stigma uptake situation is very similar, whether it's rural Mississippi or rural Uganda, in terms of stigma against homosexuality, against all challenges with all the isms. And it takes a multifactorial approach. So you need an innovative product, you need innovative and robust relationships and partnerships with people who understand the local and cultural context to make sure access is happening. You need strong relationships with the people with the money, whether that's the government or multilateral donors. And you need to be able to tell your story concisely and make the case. And those are things that we're working on at Gilead. And it does take an ecosystem, and everybody plays a role. Advocates push on us, advocates push on the government, and it's a push-pull situation to make sure that the right thing happens.
Thank you.
Hi. My name's Neji. I'm an assistant professor in the chronic disease epi department. I study medication use during pregnancy and birth defects. Specifically, I'm looking at antiretroviral use during pregnancy.
Great.
Trying to think about if we can leverage data from Medicaid to see some signals and how trends are changing. And I think you mentioned something about lenacapavir being covered by Connecticut and California Medicaid. And
yeah,
so I just wanted
we have
clarification.
75% coverage right now, including public and private insurance. So as approved in June, that's pretty high. We thought we weren't going to get to 75% until next January, but we have pretty good coverage. So you should start seeing, if you're using like IQVIA or other databases and the Medicaid databases, you should start seeing implementation and use data.
Awesome. A good fun study idea. I hear thesis ideas kind of percolating out there as well. Well, I know that many of you have to get to class, and we're starting to have folks having to head out. I want to have you join me in giving a huge round of applause for Dr. Das for her incredible career and the ways in which she is transforming the future of health, not just here in the United States, but across the globe. And look forward to many of you going and working with or for Gilead going forward.
Goodness.
So thank you. Thank you, Moupali.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.